Welcome to Every Eye is Upon Me, First Ladies of the United States, here at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery. I'm Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw. I'm the senior historian here at the National Portrait Gallery and the curator of this exhibition. This is the first exhibition at the Portrait Gallery completely dedicated to the history of the First Ladies of the United States. We've brought together a wonderful group of portraits, and we hope you enjoy seeing them. Martha Washington was our First Lady. When Americans greeted her, they called her Lady Washington. This was a term that was familiar to them as former British colonists. When she began her time as the wife of the president, she really had a very difficult go of it. She felt very confined in the houses that she lived in, first in New York City and then in Philadelphia, which were our first two capitals. While she was in Philadelphia, the artist Gilbert Stuart came to paint both her portrait and President Washington's portrait. And today we know those as the Athenaeum portraits. The National Portrait Gallery co-owns them with the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. This image, which is a copy of Martha Washington's Athenaeum portrait, also served as the basis for her picture on paper currency. Today, we know Abigail Adams for her support for women's rights. This is because while her husband, John Adams, was helping to work on the Constitution, she wrote him a letter from Boston, where she was living, down to Philadelphia, where he was working. And she said to him, "Remember the ladies." This was imploring him to give a thought to equal rights for women at a time when really that was unheard of. But it was a moment in the country's history that something like that could have happened, and she recognized that. In this portrait of her, we see her seated with her head covered, as all good, modest women did during that period, and she has a beautiful scarf over her shoulders. This scarf was probably of Indian origin, and we recognize that because of the pattern that's on it. And this would have hinted at the kind of cosmopolitan identity that she had, that she was able to wear a fine imported fabric of this sort. In this exhibition, we have two cut paper silhouettes of Abigail Adams and her daughter-in-law, Louisa Catherine Johnston Adams. These silhouettes are about yay big, and they're made out of paper. This was a very common type of portraiture in the early 19th century. It was super cheap and easy for people to have done of themselves. These silhouettes descended in the Adams family, and on the top of each one, you can see these women's names written on them and the date. Those inscriptions were done by John Quincy Adams, Abigail Adams's son, in order to recognize and identify these women. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult to do that because many silhouettes, being just black paper and white paper together, are kind of hard to recognize. Harriet Lane Johnston was known as the Democratic Queen. She served as the First Lady for her uncle, James Buchanan. Often we think of First Ladies as having been the wives of presidents, but in the 19th century, many of them were the daughters, the nieces, the daughters-in-law of presidents. Sometimes a president would be predeceased by his wife, and so a female family member or a friend of the family would function as the hostess at different events that were held in the White House. Harriet Lane was really good at that, and she also loved art. This is the only sculpture bust of a First Lady that we have in this exhibition, and it speaks to her interest in representing herself, looking beautiful, and being preserved through fine art. In this sculpture, you can see the very low-cut, plunging neckline. This was a style that she made really popular. She actually had the bodice of her dress for the inaugural ball lowered about 2 inches to show plenty of skin. This bust, along with the rest of her art collection, was given to the Smithsonian by her in her will, and it forms the basis of the fine arts collection of the Smithsonian. And our sister museum, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, holds that collection today. Frances Folsom was only 21 when she married Grover Cleveland in the White House, and she became an instant celebrity. She was young, she was beautiful, and she had a great sense of fashion. In this portrait of her by Anders Zorn, you can see this very low-cut, ruffled dress that she wears. The press kept up with her fashion, and they were really interested in whatever she was wearing. At one point, the press was looking for something to print, and so this reporter said, "Mrs. Cleveland will no longer wear the bustle." This was news to her, but she threw away all of her bustles just in case. She didn't want to mess with their copy. Julia Dent Grant was born into a wealthy slave-holding family. Her husband, Ulysses S. Grant, was born into an abolitionist family. This often caused friction in their relationship. During the Civil War, she and some of her children traveled with the general, and at one point there was a conspiracy to kidnap her that was thwarted. After the end of the Civil War, the family became a very popular subject, and we can see them here in this print, which was produced in multiple versions so that people could own them and hang them in their households. This made the Grant family very recognizable to the American public when Ulysses S. Grant ran for president. They already had a kind of celebrity factor to them. This grand portrait of Caroline Lavinia Harrison really shows us the ways that First Ladies began to take very seriously the way they would be remembered in portraiture. It's over life size, and it presents her in this beautiful evening gown. She was a very self-possessed woman, and she really believed in women's rights. At the end of her husband's presidency, she was asked to support a number of organizations, including the founding of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Just after that, she was approached by the founders of the Johns Hopkins Medical School. They wanted her to lend her name to their fundraising activities. Mrs. Harrison said, "Yes, I'll support that if you admit women." Because of that, to this day, Johns Hopkins Medical School has always been coeducational. Nellie Taft loved gardens and horticulture. We have her to thank for the cherry trees and the beautiful cherry blossoms that come out every spring around the tidal basin in Washington, D.C. As you can see from this portrait of her, she also liked beautiful clothes. She was the first First Lady to donate her inaugural ball gown to the Smithsonian, starting the collection that we now have at the American History Museum. Grace Coolidge was as friendly and outgoing as her husband was quiet and reserved. When she became First Lady, she developed a really strong relationship with the American people through the press. She became one of the most photographed women of the 1920s. One Thanksgiving, an admirer sent a raccoon to the Coolidges to be slaughtered for Thanksgiving dinner. Grace Coolidge was not interested. Instead, she put a leash on the raccoon and made it into one of her favorite pets. Rebecca the raccoon soon became a notable White House resident. In the exhibition, we've included several garments. A suit worn by Jacqueline Kennedy that was made by Chez Ninon in New York City. This is one of the ways that Mrs. Kennedy was able to dress American-made, which was very important to her. She had the fabric, the patterns, even the buttons sent over from French designers like Chanel and Givenchy, but she had her clothes made here in the United States in Manhattan. Another garment in the exhibition is the second inaugural gown worn by Nancy Reagan in 1985. This gown was designed by James Galanos. She called him Jimmy. She had a really close relationship with him, and he knew her body down to the millimeter. When we unpacked this dress, I asked the conservators, what did it weigh? Because it's absolutely encrusted with rhinestones and beads. They told me about 20 pounds. Nancy Reagan was just a tiny, petite woman. She was a perfect size too, and yet she wore that gown with beauty and grace. This cotton poplin gown, designed by Michelle Smith for her former brand, Millie, was chosen by Mrs. Obama for her official portrait that hangs behind it here in the portrait gallery. We wanted to bring this gown into the show in order for visitors to really see what it looked like in person. It's made out of a very simple fabric. Everybody has something that's made out of cotton in their closet. And this reflects the kind of American ideals that Mrs. Obama wanted to express in her choice of clothing. She often wore off-the-rack clothes by American designers as a way to support their work. In addition to our 2017 portrait of Michelle Obama, the National Portrait Gallery has commissioned 2 other portraits of First Ladies, Hillary Rodham Clinton and Laura Bush. These portraits were commissioned in order to ensure that we would have beautiful representations of these women going forward, and we hope to continue to be able to do that. Thank you for joining me on this virtual tour. I hope that you're able to come to the exhibition and see it in person, but if you aren't, you can go to firstladies.si.edu to learn more about the exhibition and these amazing women.